This is AM Agenda. Now to Lima and the climate change talks which are ongoing. I spoke to the Greens leader Christine Milne via Skype a bit earlier this morning. Senator Milne, I want to ask you about the Australian government's position when it comes to China. They say it shouldn't be seen as a developing country. Given it is the largest, if not the top two economies in the world, one of the top two economies in the world, why shouldn't it be seen differently to other developing countries?
Well, China has said that it will put its emissions target on the table the same as every other country next year. It's already doing a great deal to address global warming. I think this is a bit of a furphy from the Minister. I think she'd be much better focused on what Australia is going to be doing relative to what the United States and China have already promised.
When you say it's a furphy, isn't it important that Australia ensure that our immediate trading partners, competitors, that they are pulling their weight?
That's absolutely right, but they are pulling their weight. That's the point. In 2011 in Durban, it was agreed that all countries, developed and developing, would put targets on the table for the next agreement, and that's for Paris. That's already been agreed. There's no question that that will happen. The question is when those targets will be put on the table, and Australia is really dragging its feet. Ban Ki-moon asked for countries like ours to tell the world what we're going to do post-2020 and do that by the 31st of March next year. Australia's refused to do that and has pushed out the date until June. Nevertheless, Australia now has to put that target on the table, and the real question is how is the government going to determine the post-2020 target? Is it going to be solely the task force in Prime Minister and Cabinet, or is there going to be any consultative process with the community?
The government has moved this week, as you know, with a $200 million commitment to the Green Climate Fund. You've been critical of the government on a whole range of issues in this area, but surely you'd welcome that.
Yes, the $200 million is important that it went into the $10 billion fund, but what is unfortunate about it is the government has said that's it. They're not putting any more money in. It's $50 million a year over 4 years, and it's coming out of our overseas aid budget. That's where the bitter pill is, that after a $7.6 billion cut to the aid budget in this year's budget, they have now moved to take a further $200 million out of foreign aid in order to make this commitment. And they're meant to be putting a pathway on the table of how they're going to scale up that financial contribution, because by 2020 it's expected that $100 billion be put into developing countries, and Australia's just saying we won't contribute. So that is a real issue here, and people are thinking, and I agree, that Australia only put the money on the table because they're so isolated here, no one was taking them seriously, and that's why they had to make some gesture of negotiating in good faith.
Australia is seeking a more favourable set of rules when it comes to land clearing, land use emissions. They want that included in the next framework for targets. Is that a reasonable proposition, given it's still going to result in carbon reduction, and it's also something that was included in the first Kyoto Protocol?
This is the Australia clause, the famous Australia clause. Initially, when the Liberal Party negotiated and agreed with the Kyoto Protocol in the first place, the only way that the rest of the world got Australia across the line was to put in the so-called Australia clause, which made it a lot easier for Australia because they could count land use changes that were already occurring. Now they want to have that wrought carried over into the second commitment period for the Kyoto Protocol, and they're threatening the world, saying that they won't ratify the second commitment period for the Kyoto Protocol unless they get those rules carried over. Now, they're being supported in that by other countries which got so-called hot air agreements in the first round of the Kyoto Protocol, but we've all learnt a lot since then, and there's no way a country like Australia should be watering down the effort. We need to be lifting the target and sticking with strong rules, not trying to import get-out-of-jail-free cards from the last period.
I want to return to where we began the conversation in the broader sense, and that is the differentiation between what has traditionally been called Annex 1 and non-Annex 1 countries, basically developed and developing countries. Do you believe that that nexus or that debate has crumbled now? Do you see that the big economies, the big developing economies, are making a significant contribution, or is that still a framework through which China and India see this debate?
Well, I think that differentiation changed in 2011 in Durban when the Durban Agreement made it clear that from now on the developing countries would also put the targets on the table. China will put its emissions reduction target on the table, but so will India. And then you have to look at the differences between big emitting countries like India and China. China is much more advanced and has better capability of meeting reduction targets than India has. So you have to look at the capacity of those countries to do it. But I really think that is not the main question here. One of the main questions here is you've got a long-term agreement to constrain global warming to less than 2 degrees. Does that mean decarbonising the economy, the world, by 2050? Now, many countries believe it does. That means phasing out fossil fuels by 2050. Now, Australia is horrified by that prospect, and the Minister said yesterday, how could one possibly commit to that? Well, a lot of people think that that is what we need to commit to, because if we're going to meet the 2-degree constraint on global warming, we have to. And this is going to be where Australia really struggles unless they move at home to not go ahead with the Bowen and Galilee basins, actually get into serious emission reduction.
Greens Leader Christine Milne joining me from Lima, Peru. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Kieran.
Yeah, just repeating that interview was via Skype this morning.